Hello, my name is Lucas Fehr, and you're listening to Catholic versus Other.
So if you would just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe what you believe.
Okay, my name is Lucas Fehr. I'm 44. I'm Canadian. I was born in Edmonton. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm an agnostic. I was baptized Catholic and born into Catholic and Lutheran families. And I was confirmed Catholic, and I went to church, to Catholic church and Lutheran churches. I actually did Lutheran confirmation until I was about 17, basically until I was allowed to not go. And now I'm agnostic because my path since then has just taken me different places and my beliefs have changed.
When was the earliest encounter that you had that there's this thing called religion, or that there's this supreme being called God? What encounter might you have had as a very, very young child?
Well, my grandma is really devout, faithful Catholic, and she used to sing me a song, "Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya, oh Lord, kumbaya." And then I was walking with her, and I was about 4 years old, and she always tells me this story. I was like, "Someone's stuck in the snow, Lord, kumbaya. Oh, Lord, kumbaya." I don't know when I first felt like I believed in God. I think it was always just assumed that you believe in God based on how I grew up. And then we met my stepdad when I was about 10, and my folks got married when I was 11. And up until that point, we only went to, my mom and I, who were like on our own, only went to church mostly through special occasions, with my grandma or something at Christmas. And I would go with my dad's parents sometimes, or with my dad. But then my stepdad, who was sort of like rekindling his own faith in the United Church, decided that he should be confirmed Catholic, which was my mom's religion, so that we could all go to church together, because he was really spiritual and he prayed that God would bring him a wife, and God brought him my mom and me. And so we all went to church a lot after that. And then I got confirmed in the Catholic Church, even though I went to Lutheran confirmation. And I think when I took my first communion, I felt what I felt like was the Holy Spirit. I also think it could have been the wine and the ritual. Yeah. In retrospect, I mean, I'm totally open to the existence of the Holy Spirit, but I also think that there's other things at play.
I want to dwell just a little bit more on your childhood, from the age of reason until, like, let's say puberty. Did you ever reach out to God in prayer spontaneously, or because you were told to at night or before meals, or when you're in danger, or you thought you needed help with a test at school or something like that?
Oh, yeah, and I still do. I still petition God when I really want something or I'm really terrified. And whether or not I necessarily believe that God exists, I believe that prayer works. And so I go for that. And I know that when I think about it, it's kind of maybe cheap to just be petitioning God for things that you want, but it works. I find it helps me, it gives me solace, and often things work out. I learned to pray, I think, pretty religiously, so to speak. Every night and at meal times, we would say grace, and just for all kinds of reasons.
If you think about an infant, they begin their lives with petition. It's only later, like after the age of reason, or in some cases, maybe even after puberty or young adulthood, it's only later that we learn how to say thank you to our parents. At first, it's just give me, give me, give me. Give me your breast to suck. Give me the food. Give me the warmth. Give me shelter. Give me this. Give me that.
Yeah.
Petition is very natural. There's nothing wrong with doing petition. I consider myself a baby. When I begin my prayers, it's always with love. First, I love you. That's the first thing I say to God. I love you. And it's the most often repeated prayer that I do. And if you aren't in the habit of doing that, I think you would really enjoy it. And I encourage you and everyone listening to try it.
I think that's awesome. These days, actually, for the last few years, my prayers have been gratitude. Very rarely do I petition. I saw it at a yoga studio, and it was like, if you can't think of anything to say, just say thank you. And it was true. Like, that was like when my life was just like getting really, really good a few years ago. And I just picked it up and I was like, yeah, thank you. Because things are so good, I don't even feel like I deserve it sometimes.
It's humbling.
Yeah, for sure. It's totally humbling. I'm so appreciative of what I am and where I am and what the world is and all my relationships and the opportunities. So yeah, that's my main jam when it comes to prayer is thanks. And I totally get the I love you part too, because that's the strongest, purest way to approach the universe.
When I met you, you were an artist. Give the listener a little portrait of your journey in terms of all the wild changes in lifestyle and all the adventures. Just in a brief overview, sort of the highlights, if you would, please.
I'm pretty influenceable, and so I have embraced a lot of different philosophies. You know, I used to think that if you stare deep enough into someone's eyes, you start to see their soul. And there were a couple moments, I think, where I thought I was meeting angels because they were just revealing themselves through their eyes. And they were asking me questions like, do you remember when you knew you? And like, are you from Calgary? Are you really from Calgary? Like asking me as though I wasn't really from Calgary. I was from somewhere else and we knew each other from before. But I should add also that a lot of my experiences along the way have been like with psychotropic drugs, mushrooms, pot, LSD. A lot of my epiphanies have come from that. I kind of discarded a whole bunch of Catholic and Christian philosophy or programming when I stopped going to church and I went to university and I started smoking pot and the world was opening up to me. But I brought with me what I felt were the essentials, the core, which was the gospel of Jesus. I've never found anything that was morally superior to that, except the teachings of the Buddha, which I believe are just on par. But like I've never found anything that made more sense than the Gospels. And I was at a low point in my life when I was in Montreal, like smoking a lot of pot and was working in telemarketing, and it sucked. And I prayed for God to help me. And then 12 seconds later, two gentlemen approached me and they were like, hi, what's your name? Would you like to come to the Church of Christ? And I was like, that felt like a sign. So somehow I gave them my number and then I didn't go that weekend. And then a week later, I was depressed again and I was sitting on my balcony and I asked God again to help me. And then the phone rang and it was those guys from the Church of Christ. It's like, hey, we didn't see you last Sunday. Do you want to come back to our church? So I went, and I got totally wrapped up in the Church of Christ, and they were all young and good-looking and really enthusiastic, and we would meet and stuff and like talk about faith and what God wants of us and what the right path was, and then I was gonna like get confirmed in their church, but then they're like, well, you need to break up with your girlfriend. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And they're like, well, maybe, I mean, if you invite her to our church and if she converts as well, then it's possible you could get married and you could stay together, but you can't live out of wedlock together. And I was like, okay. So I brought her and she was just like so uncomfortable there. And it was just not her thing at all. And then her buddy, we all went out. He said, like, I look at my hand. I know what it is. Like, I'm used to it. It feels natural, but I don't understand it. I don't actually know how it works. And there's a lot of people who know a lot about biology and about medicine and about how things work, but nobody knows everything. And I always mistrust people who think they know everything. I don't think you can know everything. And I don't think these guys know everything. And I was like, no, I'm not going to jump off this cliff. And incidentally, it was funny because my greatest fear of like jumping off the cliff into like embracing this spiritual life, I was always afraid that I would have to like drop everything, give up my dreams, and I'd end up being a missionary in Africa. And I'm not a missionary, but I am in Africa. So what's funny also is that that guy who is my girlfriend's best friend, now they're married.
Speaking of love and romance, can you just talk about how you met your wife? I've never met her, unfortunately, but I've seen pictures. Tell me the sort of the magical fairy tale of your love story, please.
Okay. Well, she picked me up at a hostel in Winnipeg. She asked me out for a beer.
A modern tale.
Yeah. I've been working as a commercial diver for the last 4 years, and I was always away, like working on the road. So when I was back in Winnipeg, I would just, I was just staying at a hostel because I didn't want to get an apartment. And she was in town for a veterinarian conference, and she came back from hanging out with some colleagues, and she gave me her number. And it just turns out that I was working in the common room on my computer on an illustration contract, which I took from an old client. Like, I haven't done illustration in years, but she just called me out of the blue and offered me the contract. And even though I was just like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, this is not what I do anymore, I accepted. And I never worked in the common room except for that one night. And I was just sitting there that one night, or maybe 2 nights, working. And then she came along, and that's how I met her. And then, we spent 2 days together, 2 evenings basically. And then we texted each other for the next 3 weeks. And then when work slowed down, I just booked it out to Chilliwack where she was living. And we spent 3 weeks together. And then I got called to go work offshore in India. So I flew out there for 3 months, and we stayed in contact. And when I flew back to Vancouver, she was the first person I met at the airport. And we spent the next 3 months together, tooling around BC together. And then it turned out when I was offshore, she had 3 possibilities. She could work in Sierra Leone, Malawi, or Winnipeg. And she chose Winnipeg, and I already had a job in Winnipeg. So we both moved out to Winnipeg together that summer. She got an apartment, and I was going to look for one. And then after living together for a month, she just invited me to live with her. And so about a year later, or not even, she asked me to marry her. And she has this friend she was describing our relationship to along the way, and he asked her one day, he was like, "Are you still dating that homeless guy?" And she was like, "Yeah, he lives with me." I gave him a home. I married him.
Can you describe a little bit the psychological dynamic in the relationship? You're making it sound a little bit like she's the man, you're the woman. That's how my relationship is. There is a mix, but can you just talk a little bit about that dynamic? Because it's always so interesting to hear about these marriages and these relationships.
Yeah, it's both, right? She's very much her own woman, and she's totally driven and career-oriented, and she's got daddy issues. So she's all about excellence, and her dad's a biology professor, so she's planning on doing a PhD, and she really wants to make a difference. She's really logical and super agreeable, and totally no nonsense, no drama. So that is such a refreshing relationship for me, to be with someone who is not interested in conflict or throwing a fuss over meaningless things that don't matter. And my first marriage was kind of traumatic. We fought a lot, and we fought a lot often about little things. And I learned so much from that relationship. The kernel of truth that I learned from that relationship is to remind the person you love, your beloved, that you love them, and then explain whatever the conflict is from your perspective. And that's why I think this relationship works really well. We had a couple arguments in the last couple of years, and we never raised our voice. And they were just kind of tense, and we both realized that they were a little tense there for a bit, and then we talked about it afterwards, and we're cool. And yeah, so she's the man. So I'm following her around, in that role, because her career is super important, and she really wants to do her dream job here. And I can kind of essentially work from anywhere. And so I'm really happy, really content just to enjoy my life to the fullest.
Your life is good, but you certainly would acknowledge that a lot of people don't have a very good life, a very happy life. So how do you deal with the problem of evil?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to believe in evil. I'm not sure if I do anymore as like a force on its own. And I think that love is the answer for sure. And I'm all about planetary transformation and spiritual transformation of our culture and of moving towards like healthier, happier, more self-realized, generous, prosperous lives. Like I'm all about that. But I don't know that there is such a thing as evil. I think that it's possible that everything is good and that even the worst thing that could befall you in this life, if you had the right perspective, it would be good. If you were not afraid to die and you were not afraid of pain and you had a cosmic perspective, like you're the mind of God or whatever, like you're approaching that kind of inner peace, that it would not be evil, it would be good.
Yeah, that's the Catholic teaching. The technical teaching about evil is that it has no substance. The only reality is goodness and love and ultimately God. God doesn't create anything evil. He's incapable of any evil. Evil is not a thing. Evil is a way. It's a way of falling away from God and from all of God's good gifts. Choosing a lesser good over a higher good means necessarily that we are choosing goods. We're always choosing goods. So that's really what philosophy is all about, striving for happiness, ultimate lasting happiness. Speaking of philosophy, what do you think about sexual morality, the sexual morality that's taught by the Catholic Church? Do you think it's stern and counterproductive, or do you think it's beautiful but inaccessible?
Yeah, so that's one thing I really didn't like about it. I was told masturbation was a sin, and I felt gross and uncomfortable about that, about my sexuality as a boy. And it took years and years and years for me to unravel that and for me to come to a place where my sexuality was beautiful and it was a blessing. And I've always, I think, been a bit of a pervert at heart. Like it's always been a strong part of my life. I adore women. I adore sex. I want to make that a huge part of my life. The things that I like most in my life are drawing, frisbee, and sex. And I'm not as into drawing or frisbee anymore. I feel like my current relationship is really, really good. And I feel like I found my special purpose, you know? Like as being a loving husband, a supportive, loving husband who takes really good care of my wife. It's a dream to me. It's a dream come true. But I felt so guilty and so uncomfortable about my own perversions for so much of my life. I feel like that's the one thing that my religion growing up kind of failed me. Maybe not failed me, that's the wrong word, but just that I didn't agree with. Like if I could go back and tell my pubescent self, don't worry about it, just relax, go on dates, masturbate as much as possible, doesn't matter, draw erotic things, you're really into erotic things, just like those things are as holy as anything else. Those things are just full of love, and you come to it from a place of love, and just embrace it. And if you come to it from a place of love, I think it is just as holy as anything else. I mean, it's a sin. It's sinful. A lot of sexual things in the religion I was raised in are sinful, but I don't think that they are. Yeah, I don't think that's cultural. I don't feel that in my heart. I feel that it's awesome.
Are you pro-choice? Are you pro-life? Or what's your view on abortion?
I think it's really not even my choice to make. I'm pro-choice. It's the choice of the person who has the baby. I would totally welcome a baby into my life, and I wouldn't advocate for an abortion. But my wife doesn't want kids. If we had an accident and she wanted an abortion, then it would be up to her. I think it's best for people to be able to choose. So I think it's been, how long has it been? Like 8 years since you converted to Catholicism?
9 years, yeah.
9 years. So how's your faith?
It's growing stronger because I'm making an effort to nurture the flame of faith and to grow the faith. It's just like a relationship with your spouse. If you neglect it, it will die. There's no neutrality. Either you're advancing or you're retreating. There's no stability.
Yeah.
So you have to make that effort. you can't really get in the habit of neglecting. And I don't think there are 10 minutes in the day where I'm not thinking about God.
I think I asked you this before, but what do you think about other religions?
Well, I'm growing to appreciate them now that I'm doing this podcast. I've talked to a lot of different people, not as many as I'd like to, because some people are shy to come on the show. But I'm getting appreciation, and my understanding of the scary Catholic dogma that there's no salvation outside of the Catholic Church, I'm coming to understand that it's not as scary as I thought it was, and that everyone is on their way into heaven, except for those people that obstinately choose that they would prefer not to. So it's not a grim or scary scenario for me. It's like, I know that everyone I've met loves truth and justice and beauty, and so they love my God whether they know it or not. And something you said earlier about people being agents of God without knowing it, unwittingly. I'm not a universalist. I don't believe that everyone is guaranteed to go to heaven, because that would completely undermine morality. We have to be responsible. And I don't want a wife that's my wife only because she has to be. I want my wife to love me and to choose me. So we have to actively choose our spouse, and we have to actively choose to love God too. But I think most people do love God. They just don't call it God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I have a very optimistic view. Maybe it's a little bit too rosy, but I have a very optimistic view about all the religions. And I've encountered some pretty wacky religions, but even those people seem to have a lot in common with my love of truth, my love of justice, my love of beauty, and my love of goodness. So I'm really not worried about it. And I think everyone's on a journey. There's psychological baggage. There are a lot of daddy issues, mommy issues, and sexual issues and all this sort of stuff. And it's none of my business. So I just wish them well and encourage them on their way. But, you know, I am very, very, very excited about my own religion, and I sort of see every other worldview as a gateway into the Ark. My obsession is with Noah and Noah's Ark. I'm really obsessed with that. I see the Pope as the antitype of Noah. Noah was a shadow of St. Peter. And all of the popes have the authority of the keys, so they can bind what they bind on earth is bound in heaven. What they loose on earth is loosed in heaven. So complete docile and obedient submission to Pope Francis is the emphasis now for me as a Catholic. That's what I emphasize. Get into the Ark, get into the church. And for those who are not yet explicitly Catholic, I'm not worried about them, but everyone I meet, I tell them as gently as I can, get into the church. It's not always appropriate to say that, so I do bite my tongue sometimes, but the basic message is there's one Ark and you're in or you're out, so get in. But I see the hills and the valleys covered with streams of people wandering around doing this and doing that, and a lot of them will make their way into the Ark. But I feel an obligation to be a voice, the voice of Noah, the voice of St. Peter, the voice of Pope Francis, saying, come in, everyone's welcome, everyone's invited. Now, will some people refuse to enter the Ark? Yeah, they will. That's sad. But God knows each and every one's heart. And so I don't need to worry about that. I just need to be optimistic that there's a time and a place and let God work. But at the end of my interviews, I always ask my guests to give a little message of hope, something positive. What might you be able to say to someone that's out there listening now?
What I like to repeat to myself to keep myself on my own path is, may all beings be happy. And I like the idea that everything is getting better, but life would not be nearly as interesting if it wasn't a minefield of problems and pitfalls. I think the journey is the destination, and just enjoy the ride and don't worry about being uncomfortable, because you will grow from your suffering. And as long as you keep planting seeds of light instead of planting seeds of darkness, then things will just they will get better. So have faith in that. And the thing that sticks with me the most is that I don't know if God exists. I don't know what's true, just what I feel. But I think the materialist atheist scientists and the devout faithful can both be right in a way that's like a miracle, right? Like that all things are holy and we can't know God's thoughts. And it doesn't matter one way or the other. It doesn't matter if you believe it's real, because it's real for lots of people.
It's If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you've got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.